All right, I want to welcome all of you to our webinar this week. I'm Mark Schumacher, the CEO of the Home Furnishings Association, and in our efforts to really listen to you and try to give you the information you've been looking for, today is yet another one of those subjects that has a great deal of interest, and that is really talking about consumer behavior. Let's face it, it has changed dramatically over the last 3 years. It seems to change almost by the moment. So we've got a couple of experts here that are really going to help us when it comes to understanding what that consumer behavior is, and then how, of course, you can leverage that in your business. Before I introduce them and we start, I do want to, of course, do a little bit of housekeeping here. Want to, first of all, thank Synchrony. They are the thought leader sponsor when it comes to our education here at HFA, and we do appreciate that very, very much. And also, this is going to be recorded, and you'll be able to see it on demand. It's at myhfa.org/webinar, which is where you'll find an amazing library of all sorts of great subject matter to help you with your business. But this is going to be added to that today, and I'm excited about it. Joining us, one is a familiar face. Rhonda Slavin is joining us again. She's been with us before. She's the market insights leader for Synchrony. She manages a team that focuses on business, consumer, and competitor insights, et cetera, and behaviors. And she's got some really great data to pull from today. So Rhonda, thanks for joining us once again here at HFA. Appreciate it. And also we have Chris Wallace joining us. He's co-founder and president of Interview Group. They have a platform called In Front, and they apply market research to collect and analyze customer needs and company value proposition, customer experience, et cetera. So we've got two people here that can really talk a lot about this subject, and we're going to try to keep it as focused as we can on the whole behavior question. But I want to start this out by saying something that, as I've been, kind of studying and preparing for this webinar, really and truly, the customer behavior or sentiment, whatever you want to call it, that is really the hub of the wheel here, right? So, Rhonda, let's talk about that first of all. One thing I said in the opening, this has been really a moving target in the last couple of years, because I imagine that the customer behavior in 20 was different than 21, than 22, and then here we are in another year. Can you talk a little bit about how this has been sort of difficult to manage and to follow?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say roller coaster would be the right word. I'm glad you acknowledged that right out the get-go, that it has been hard to manage and track. It absolutely has. We started tracking at Synchrony consumer sentiment in April of 2020, right away when we saw the pandemic kick in, and we've been tracking it monthly ever since. And so it has been a lot of ups and downs. It's been hard to predict. As we think about 2020, that year was all about managing the moment as we were in the moment. And there was so much happening week to week that you couldn't even look forward a month ahead, right? You were living in the day-to-day or the week-to-week.
Sure.
2021, we started to see consumers get back a little bit to some of their old behaviors, but we were still pretty entrenched. And now we fast forward to 2023, and we're looking backwards and saying, wow, a lot has changed. But it is quite unpredictable in terms of where we're headed. So we've seen some big changes happen that are sticking, and I think we'll probably get into some of those as we go through.
100%.
But now we're at this point where it's looking forward is so hard to predict. We have all these external factors with inflation, and so much going on in the market and the US environment in general right now that it makes it pretty uncertain kind of where things are headed. So we're looking at things on kind of a 60-day to 6-month basis. But yes, a lot has changed, and it's been very volatile. Absolutely.
So we will certainly, and you're right, we are going to really kind of, peel this onion back, slice by slice here in a second. Let me just ask one thing of you, Chris, to kind of get us started off as well. We talk about this whole concept of consumer behavior, and it sounds, a little fluffy. It sounds a little esoteric in certain ways, but everything that we hear from retailers, you're constantly, and I talk to them every day. Oh my gosh, how do we drive traffic? How do we do all these things? I have to imagine that this particular study we're talking about today, all this we're talking about, all this data, has got to be the driver of this, right? I think we're going to get information today that's going to help everybody sort of focus on all those other areas they're talking about. But talk to me about this being the hub of this whole thing and how important this is.
Yeah, I think that what you can focus on to stand out is going to be key, right? If you want to drive traffic, you have to stand out. And, I think you'll probably hear it a few times from us today. But the idea of products being what set you apart, it really doesn't matter what category you're in, but everybody's got product, or, maybe not during the pandemic with supply chain issues, but generally speaking, consumers are recognizing that the retailers have product. It's about who can stand out for other reasons and who can match the other reasons that customers are out there, making their decisions based upon. That's where we think there's the opportunity not only to stand out during the search process when they're evaluating which retailers to go into, but ultimately once they step foot in the store, closing that sale. So I think it's about traffic. It's also about taking advantage of the traffic that does come into your store and make sure it's as valuable as it possibly can be.
But let's talk about that as the first of many takeaways from this whole thing. Rhonda, something that Chris just said is interesting because I'm sort of hearing him saying, I believe in some of the things that you've published recently, kind of saying the whole focus on product is not moving the needle right now.
Well, it's really what our research is showing is it's really table stakes. And so now the way to differentiate, and you have to have those things. So Chris and I talk a lot about being careful about the words we use, right? It's still important, but it has become table stakes. So some of the things you think about is having a variety of products, making sure that your website is optimal so people can easily find product information. All of those things are very important, but they're table stakes now. Those are not going to be the areas that you really differentiate. And so our research revealed, and Chris was quick to pull out some of those nuggets, was that it is all about the experience, particularly the in-store experience, the knowledge of the associates, how you can differentiate through your mobile app and some of those technologies. But a lot of it's going to be more experiential versus, and value equation is still very important, but a lot of the things related to product selection, product quality, product durability, all those things important, but table stakes. And I think that's what we're seeing now in our data.
So those are the givens. And, and in the
Yes.
past, features and benefits have always been, worn on the sleeve. And we're kind of saying right now, that's not the thing that's necessarily driving the traffic or pushing the needle. The interesting thing, and I wasn't sure how quickly we would get to this, but I find it super interesting, is some of your data shows when you talk about this, the importance of the sales associate. I found that to be really interesting because I think a lot of times we assume because there's so much pre-shopping that's going on as people are, checking things in advance, as they're more educated when they walk in the door, et cetera. And with all of these things that retailers provide, the sales associate isn't always sort of necessarily seen as absolutely the top of that. Your research is showing that they're more important than ever. Explain more about that, either one of you, and then we'll talk more about it.
Yeah, I can start, and then Chris, you can. Yeah, well,
yeah, sure.
I have a comment about specifically kind of the consumer coming into the store already armed with a lot of online research they've done. We know that to be true. We know younger generations in particular are doing a lot of research beforehand. So now the information they need from your associate needs to be more specific and more detailed, right? They've done the cursory search. They are educated on what's out there, what brands are out there. They generally have an idea of what they're looking for by the time they walk in your door. Now is the time where they're expecting that sales associate to go deeper on topics that they may not even know. What are the details about the protection plan that I couldn't find online? Tell me more about how the installation and delivery is going to go. So they need to be armed with kind of more depth of knowledge on some of the details than maybe they were in the past, because they are already past the stage of that cursory information.
Interesting. So to use, I'm a metaphor freak.
Sure.
So people aren't coming in necessarily just dipping their toes in the water. They're already in. They're kind of already moving toward the deep end. And you're saying, you don't want to skip over things, but clearly, if that customer feels like you're now taking them to the next step, that's important. Chris, weigh in on this, because this is something that there's not a person watching this that has a store, whether it's single store or more than one store, that's not going to benefit from this with their sales teams.
Yeah, so I'm gonna reinforce it with a statistic from the research. 86% of the consumers who interacted with a salesperson said that salesperson impacted their final purchase decision. So think about that. 9 in 10 people are saying that the salesperson influenced their purchase decision.
Wow.
So to Rhonda's point, the salesperson is looked to as a funnel. The opportunity is to simplify the choosing process. If a consumer comes into your store with a set of parameters that they're looking for, and they've done their research, and you walk in and you expand their search back out and you broaden their search and you actually introduce more variables to them, you're widening the funnel, not narrowing it. The salespeople need to be looking to narrow that funnel, understand where they are in that journey, and help them start to eliminate options and narrow in on the thing that they want. There's nothing more important, we believe, in terms of the experience and the home goods categories and major purchase categories. There's nothing more important than the sales associate can do than help to make that choice simpler and shorter. That's going to build confidence and lower anxiety in the customer. These are high anxiety purchases.
100%. And, I think that what we're really talking about here is, one of the biggest parts of the sales, cycle is that discovery piece. And it sounds like I'm hearing both of you sort of indirectly suggest that when that customer comes in the door, maybe just right out of the gates, kind of gauge where they are research wise. Tell me a little bit about so that you can take that to the next step. Because I think if you start at square one, that may be that 14% that were just like, well, they didn't make a difference because it was just repetitive. I mean, around 86% is not. I mean, this is not like incremental. We're talking about a huge influential piece.
Well, and to give some more proof points behind kind of what we're alluding to here, 9 in 10 in the home category, 9 out of 10 are coming in after they tell us already doing some form of online research. So you can bet the large majority of customers who walk through your door, regardless of age or demographic or whatever you predispose kind of perceptions of that customer, 9 in 10 have done online research. They have a good sense. So to probe and ask them where they are in their journey, assume they've done some research. And I think the metaphor of a funnel is perfect that Chris used in terms of helping them decide. When we look at the factors, we ranked the factors that are the drivers of decision making in these bigger ticket home categories. And when we look at the ranking of those factors, we kind of rank them, 1 to 20. Number 4 and 5 are, I had a positive shopping experience and it was an easy shopping experience. So to Chris's point, if the sales associate is starting to introduce more information or different products or take them down a path, is that easy, or are you now distracting me and taking me off my shopping journey and making me question myself? So helping them get through that process as easy as possible, be more decisive. And at the end of the day, you're trying to convert more customers.
100%. I mean, this is a huge takeaway early in this webinar, because you're absolutely right. There's nothing about that's not actionable right now. That's right. The part of it, right? I mean, we're not talking about, they don't have to go out and buy anything new. They just have to make their teams aware that this is the environment right now. One of the things that comes out of that, as far as this retail experience is, and I saw this in some of the materials that you guys have provided, is using, confidence, that very, very important word. And it said that, you're talking about wanting that these customers want to have confidence in their purchase. Can you, Chris, I'll start with you. Can you define that for us? What is truly confidence in a purchase made of? What are the elements there?
Yeah, we look at it as a few different things that make up confidence. And I'll point out one statistic, that the average purchase size in the research that we did in these home categories was just shy of $2,600. Okay, so it's not a small purchase that these folks are making. So you don't want to get it wrong, right? That's key. And we look at some of the things that were most important to consumers when they were picking retailers. Things like stance behind the products they sell. Well, they want to feel confident that there's a person to call, a place to go back to if something goes wrong with their purchase. They want to feel like somebody will back them up. We talked about the sales associates being knowledgeable as something that's important. Again, these are not typical categories for most consumers. They're not shopping in these categories all that frequently, so they need some expertise. They're leaning on the salespeople to guide them toward the right thing. So they're sort of putting their faith in that salesperson that they'll guide them the right place, because they don't know. They don't have confidence. They're overwhelmed by that choice. So when we look at those types of things, and another one for me that stands out, and this, is a tip of the cap to our partners at Synchrony, is the financing piece. Their interest in looking at various financing options, and that being a top 10 priority for them, because they want to feel like they made a good financial decision too. Doesn't mean that they're looking for the lowest price, but they want to feel like, I looked at all my options, I made a good decision. If that means I took no interest financing for 12 or 24 months, even if you got the money, people still feel good about making that decision if they can save the money and earn the interest in the meantime. So they want to feel like overall they made a good product decision. They made a good financial decision. They were guided to the right thing.
Rhonda, what would you add to that? I saw you kind of nodding there. I'm sure there's some things to add to this whole confidence question.
Absolutely. Well, and on the financing point too, I was just refreshing and looking back at some of our most recent data, and we see that 70% of shoppers who did end up using a financing plan to pay for these large ticket purchases said, I did so because it gave me that level of purchase protection, right? I know if something goes wrong, I can, get Synchrony involved or get my credit card company involved. It's not like a debit purchase that has a little bit more risk to it. And so just purchase protection leads back to that product assurance. We use that word a lot when we talk about this research, is product assurance, making sure my experience is kind of protected. And so not only can it help spread out your payments, but that's another element of you leveraging the payment plan, is that you have that backing behind you from a product assurance. So just to add on to what Chris said, but absolutely, I think the ease of purchase, the role of the associate is so important. And actually, when we came into the 2021 wave, and we're getting ready to field the 2023 wave right now, and I would suppose we might see some differences again. I was surprised that the role of the associate, to your point, Mark, was as high on the list as it was. I would have suspected, as people went more to their mobile devices post-pandemic, as they turned more to the online channel, maybe the role of associate would diminish. But in fact, it was the opposite. And I think it's that kind of push-pull of, I've exhausted everything I can find, so the person I need to turn to is that human element. I can't find the answer on my own, and that's when you really do need that knowledgeable sales associate.
Well, and let's call it what it is too. This is also a challenge in a positive way for brick and mortar. We realize we always try to talk about what is still the importance of a store, of the four walls, et cetera. This is it. This is telling everybody loud and clear that really does matter, particularly right now. And obviously this can change. That's what's so fluid about this. But this is the consumer right now. I want to mention, by the way, to anybody that's joining us, we have a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Put a question there. We'll make sure that we get to it as best we can. But I appreciate that. So let me just ask you before we get back into some of this data. When we came out of the early stages of the pandemic, and we had that pent up demand, et cetera, and then it carried through 21, it's very clear that, that home was such a focus because of me working at home. Hi, that's what I'm doing here. I think you are too. All of us probably are. But my question is, from what you're seeing with consumer behavior, et cetera, do we know if that is still as important? Is this focus on home something that is sticking, or is that fading away?
Well, there's two things that are emerging. One area that we see with the home in particular is we do see a pullback in general on home related purchases in substitute for experiences. So wave over wave, when we track this data, we continue to see consumers say right now, and for the next 6 months going forward, is what the consumers tell us, that they are spending on travel and they're spending on entertainment and dining. They have shifted from, I invested so heavily in my home in the last 2 years that now I am shifting back, and probably overcorrecting, honestly, back to travel, to get back out and put off trips over the last few years.
Get out of the house.
So, and with the inflationary pressures, and we do see they're leaning a little bit back into credit, and so there's that savings that they're dipping back into. At some point, they just have to make trade-offs, right? If I want to travel and I want to entertain, I don't have the bandwidth I had in 21 to be able to do everything I wanted to do. I have to make some trade-offs. So from a home perspective, we do see pullback. The one area that we actually, for the home, we do continue to see investment in personal health and wellness. So if you think about your home space and areas that health and wellness comes into the home, that's an element we do still see consumers talk about spending for themselves personally, health and wellness related themes, whether it's sleep being tied to health and wellness, or fitness, or those things that are integrated in the home in that way. But other traditional home furnishings categories, it just seems like, for at least what we are seeing for the next 60 days to 6 months, they're really focused on spending time with family and traveling and experiences. There's no major drop-offs we see. It's more just flat on some of their intended spending across the home category.
Well, these nuances are important. Chris, do you have anything you want to add to that whole home concept?
I would just say flat is think about the plateau. If you're flat, think about what that plateau looks like with how high those purchases jumped over the last couple of years. I think I just saw the other day, we do a lot of work in the flooring space, but I think I saw the other day that floor and decor was up 14 or 15% over last year. So what I think feels like it should be softening. I don't know that it's the raging growth, but even if it does plateau, that's still not bad for the merchants in these categories.
Okay, fair. I appreciate that. There's a lot of questions that we get, in advance of these webinars, and this was one I thought was interesting, and I'm not sure you can what the data says, but the question was, they asked, how are consumers changing the way they're thinking about making purchases? In other words, frictionless, engagement at point of sale, et cetera. I mean, you talked a little bit about obviously the importance of the salesperson, but can you maybe add a little more color to that to help out those that are watching today?
Yeah, I mean, one area that we're seeing is there was a massive shift to mobile devices. That was our number one big thing we saw happen in our data during the last 3 years is, really almost triple digit growth and mobile usage for the shopping process. And so now what we're seeing, and if we're thinking about attracting a younger audience to our brands and talking to everyone out there, as you think about filling that customer pipeline over time, is we do see younger generations really leaning in on mobile enabled experiences. So we have the table stakes that we talked about for your current customer base, right? But when you think about making sure not only do I have all the information on my website, but is my experience, my website, my information mobile enabled so I can easily attract. You're not even going to be in the consideration set for a young millennial, older Gen Z person in the next few years if you're not mobile enabled and have some of those strong, easy to use mobile experiences. So as I think about what's changed and where we need to now focus going forward, that's a big shift I think we're seeing. And we could keep talking status quo around product assurance and associates, and those are all important, but what's next? And so I think that's the other areas we have to make sure, go back and say, where do we have gaps in our experience from a mobile perspective that will hinder our ability to attract a younger customer? That's one area I see in the data.
Fair. And Chris, I guess that if I'm kind of piecing all these things together, for that customer to come in the door, to be influenced by that sales, associate, to be taken to the next level, you got to make sure that experience before they get to the door, this is really what Ron is talking about, how critically important that is. Can you talk a little bit about those nuances as well? Because I know you guys are so focused on the customer experience end of things.
Yeah, I think customer experience is a game of and that's what we always tell our clients. It's not an either or, it's a game of and. So I'll give you an example from the data. The customers or the buyers were asked to actually rate 24 different factors in terms of the criteria they use when selecting a retailer, specifically selecting the retailer. And the last two items on that list, numbers 23 and 24, were a web-enabled shopping gallery, basically an online buying experience. And the last one was the option to buy online and pick up in store. Those are 23 and 24 out of 24 items. But as Rhonda said earlier, it doesn't mean it's not important. It just doesn't mean it's as relatively important as some other things. But to go back what I said about customer experience being a game of and, they're not saying those are the most important things right now for their purchase decision until they decide they're the most important things. So I think the takeaway there is to be thinking about how it fits in your business, what you're hearing from your customers. Definitely the idea of the website and mobile working in conjunction with what happens in the store, but then also thinking about how the frictionless experience fits in what you're hearing from customers. They might not be the most important right now, but thinking about it all the way from that first click all the way through to how they want to purchase, you almost have to be doing all of it.
Well, and the thing about what you just said too that's important to remind ourselves is both of 23 and 24 sounded very much on the transactional end of the online experience. And so it doesn't mean there's not a lot of front end work going on with the shopping process. So, you got to also take that with a little bit of a grain of salt.
Those were much higher.
Yeah. I was just going to say, so that, but it's interesting because I question where, if we did a survey of everybody on this, watching this webinar, they might be all over the board of where they think that ranks. So that's highly important information, to know that. Rhonda, you mentioned you gave us a little bit of a demographic seasoning there a second ago. I guess my question is that can you talk a little bit more, both of you, about sort of the demographic differences when it comes to, consumer behavior or consumer confidence. And because as everybody's listening to that, they're thinking about, their constituents, their customers, as far as what that customer looks like. And so I think it'd be helpful to know if there are some demographical nuances, if you will.
Sure. Well, and the ranking that Chris just talked about, number 23, number 24, when I look at that by generation, millennials and Gen Z, that ranking is higher for them. Now, is it way at the top of the list? No, it's more like, 18, 19, but it does move up with the younger generations. So, that's one thing we see different. We know that there's two big dividing lines that we see in the data. If you're basically under 45, we see you are much more mobile. You're much more comfortable making a big purchase online without ever stepping foot in store. So we have about one in four saying, I bought something that was $2,500 and I never stepped foot in the store. That is higher among younger generations. So it's we see that as a dividing line. We do see that younger generations are more asking for those virtual, more immersive experiences. Again, not number one, but we see them kind of at the top. Whereas the Gen X and Boomers we see do still even more heavily place weight on product assurance, product protection, and product quality. So there is kind of this, there's this trade-off happening that we're seeing. And then the only other thing that I'd make note of in the purchase journey and what we see differs by kind of age and generation is during the pandemic in particular, or post-pandemic world that we live in today, we do see that the pandemic and all these changing behaviors has driven younger generations towards financing more so than even older generations. And so so when there was a question we asked about, I am, comfortable using financing, or I seek financing for large purchases. It was actually much higher for younger generations than it was for Gen X and Boomers. So something that was a little bit counterintuitive, but I think they're thinking about their wallet and some of those trade-offs they have. And there's a lot more payment options out there now.
Interesting. So I mean, a little bit of maturation there maybe too, they've not been exposed to it so much. That's intriguing. I don't know that I would have thought that before this particular bit of research. Chris, you made a grave error a second ago by mentioning a list of 24 and giving 23 and 24, because the question that snapped back from one of our listeners here is okay, but we want to know the top 5. It's great to know 23 and 24, but what are the top 5? Can you give those in order? I had the feeling something like this was coming, because it's just like, yeah, you gave us the bottom. It's like, okay, give us the gold.
I feel like this will take people back, but I feel like David Letterman. I feel like I need the cards and I need to, read off the top 5 list here.
You're talking my language, Chris.
Sioux City, Iowa. there we go. So number 1 was stands behind the products they sell, and just so people are clear on what we asked them. It was, when selecting a retailer for a major purchase, basically rate the following or rank the following as, in terms of importance to you. And the people that selected the top 2, one of the top 2 items in terms of importance, that determined what portion of those determined what came out as number 1. So stands behind the products they sell was number 1.
Okay.
Offers value for the money was number 2. Sales associates are knowledgeable was number 3. You can believe that. Number 3. Provides tied for 4th with 57% of people having it in the top 2, where provides a positive shopping experience and overall ease of purchase. So those were the 2 that Rhonda mentioned earlier. So that's the top 5, which I think even just the top 5 is very telling in terms of, it's almost more important what's not in there than what is in there. Product is not in there, right? But even as you get down into the rest of the top 10, there are obviously some very important items in there, some of which may or may not stay in the top 10 once we come out of this, the COVID period. So it kind of remains to be seen. I can't wait to see the 2023.
Let me go. I want to go a little granular on that, because Rhonda, one of the things that I find interesting is that number 2 was offers value for the money, but that's not specifically saying that price is the driver. I don't see on this list, at least I have the top 10 here, I don't see price. Is that Is, I
No.
mean, tell, where does
Well,
that, where
we
does that
tend
fit in?
to, honestly, for this type of research, we tend to not test price as an isolating factor because we know, it's kind of one of those, polarizing topics. And so we tend to prefer to put it in the frame of value for the money. At the end of the day, we know that that's what really matters to consumers. And so
Okay.
some of these other things that make the whole list make up that value, right? Whether we're talking about product quality or speed of delivery or the product insurance, the knowledgeable, well, coming back to the assurance that Chris talked about, the associate was so knowledgeable they made me feel like I was making a good decision. That's a value equation, right? You left with
100%.
confidence. If we've all bought something large in our lives where we walk down and go, oh, was that a mistake, right? That won't make you feel good about the value you just invested in that item, right? And so I think
Right.
that comes back to the associate, the role the associate plays. Ease of purchase, you can go either way, but some of the middle of the pack ideas are things like speed of delivery, product insurance, some of those things, and that all drives that value equation. At the end
100%,
of the day, they want to, but the fact that stands behind the product they sell beat out value is interesting too, right? So value is important, but at the end of the day, if I walk away and I feel like if something goes wrong, they don't have my back or they won't take it back or make it right or whatever, then value doesn't matter, because at that point I've just wasted my money. So it's interesting to me that number one for a few years in a row remains that stands behind the products we sell.
Yeah, very, very helpful. I appreciate that. I guess the thing we've not really talked about yet is that, we talk about consumer confidence and behaviors and things of that sort. So often it's, driven by external forces. Can you give us an idea over the last, because we've had this situation where I've referred to it as having, 1 foot in and 1 foot out of a recession. We've been waiting for the recession to start. And some people are saying, well, we've been in it, there's all this debate, but for the last year, we've been really just kind of dancing in and around all of this. How has that economic uncertainty impacted consumer behavior and confidence, at least in what you all are seeing in your research?
Well, like I said, we track a lot of these variables every month. And it was interesting from about fall of last year through March of this year, we were seeing a nice steady increase in overall outlook from the consumer. It wasn't big jumps. They were kind of just steadily saying, okay, it's not getting worse. It's not getting worse. We're just in this trench here. And so it was improving. When April hit, we did see a big drop off. So April was the first month where we kind of saw this big drop off. And the drivers that we're seeing are a fewfold. Number one, we had just come off the SVB bank chaos that was creating a little bit of instability. Our survey literally fielded, a few weeks right after that happened. So it was creating some uncertainty. We've had a few additional Fed rate increases, obviously, since then on the inflationary side. And then the other driver we saw, which grew 11 percentage points month over month, was employment uncertainty. So there's been a lot of large scale tech layoffs. There's been a lot of layoffs happen in certain sectors across the board, and they continue. I saw another one this morning. And I think there are pockets of those in certain income groups that are feeling a little bit more pressure than they haven't felt before from employment. How secure is my employment? Or now I'm seeking employment and it's taking me much longer to find another job than I thought. And so those two factors were kind of the drivers of that drop we saw that we hadn't seen in previous months. So it was just in April or early April, they were just kind of getting hit from all sides, I think. I think they were hearing some economic things on the news that they weren't sure about. And then all of a sudden, we see some more layoffs happen. And then we got a few more Fed increases. So it's just kind of the perfect storm. Now I think things have calmed down a little bit, but then we have had another, Fed rate hike since then. So we'll kind of keep monitoring it. But we were seeing a nice steady, like, oh, okay, they're not too pessimistic. They're trying to hold on to that positivity. But unfortunately, April was a month we saw a little bit of a reversal on that.
And it keeps kind of yanking everybody back and forth. I mean, we had a decent inflation report come out yesterday. That's great. That was not fantastic, but it was at least a positive indicator. But then, like you said, you've got all these negatives back and forth. Chris, what are your thoughts also about how these different economic nuggets, how they really impact this whole consumer confidence and behavior?
I'll be honest and say that Rhonda's data is probably going to be more scientific than what I have in terms of what I'm seeing. But anecdotally, I definitely see that what you read in the news and what we see in the trenches don't seem to match up exactly. I think that there's the phrase I've used lately is we almost seem to be trying to talk ourselves into a recession, or the media is trying to talk us into one. That's not to say that there aren't indicators of it, but the anecdotal that we see is, again, I'll go back to seeing companies like, Floor and Decor, being up in purchases. And I definitely think that there's more fear than reality right now is what I've seen.
Okay, no, I think those are, listen, anecdotal is you're not just pulling that out of the air. You're basically kind of pulling a number of things together, and I think that's important. But also the other thing too, and Rhonda, this kind of speaks to what you're talking about is when you look at overall, it's one set of pressures, but for our retailers, their communities, it's different around the country. There are some areas that are impacted worse than others, and some that aren't, and so. I'm almost in, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm almost hearing you say that maybe there's a point to really paying attention to your world, your immediate world, because, there could be positives or negatives you have to manage on that level that maybe don't affect other parts of the country.
Well, and I've gotten a lot of requests following up on some of our data around, hey, we're seeing some odd pressures in the Southwest. Can you look into it? And I look at my data and I don't see any spikes in the Southwest. So again, to Chris's point, it's very strange when we see things happen in the data. We've kind of come to the conclusion that we're on like a little bit of a 2-month lag. If you hear something hit the news, it takes about 2 months before I pick it up from a consumer perspective. There's that delay when things start to settle in. And so it's interesting. And so we don't always see the things that you guys are feeling in your business every day in your local region. We're not seeing that necessarily come through in all of our data. The one thing I would add from a demographic, and we're talking geography and all that, is where we do see a big difference is by kind of income groups, right? And so those under 50,000, I think, have learned to manage with the budgets they have, right? They have learned tactics for how to manage a smaller budget. Those over 100,000 are resilient. They're not seeing a ton of pressure. The one area they're watching very closely is their investments. So over 100K is feeling a lot of pressure on my portfolio is not looking as good, and I'm getting concerned about that, right? But they're not so worried about putting food on the table. That's more, the area we see the biggest pressure is that 50 to 99, the middle income group, or slightly over. They're feeling the most pressure. They tend to have more kids in school age. They have a lot of things going on. They're at that life stage where they've got a lot of bills going in and out. They're not at retirement yet, but they're not starting out either. And that's the group that kind of wants to move on to the next biggest thing and wants to have all the new nice stuff, but they're not there yet, right? So they're feeling the most inflationary pressure. Everything from what they put on their plate to the decisions they're making and trade-offs, they're feeling like they're getting hit the hardest. That's what they're telling us in our research, at least. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. At first, you would think it'd be the lower income group, but they've kind of come up with tactics for how to work around that lower income, where the middle income is the one that feels the most pressure right now.
I think that's incredibly insightful, especially for those retailers that have a pretty good idea about what their customer looks like from that economic standpoint. So that's super helpful. One thing I'd like to
Mark, can I offer one thing? Just in addition to that, I think as we're talking about some of the macro stuff, I think it goes back to something that we said earlier in the session today, which is it also makes conversion all that much more important, right? When you think about it's how much traffic can you drive, and macroeconomic pressures might be impacting that. But when somebody does come into your store or does engage with you, having the mentality that allows you to close a higher percentage of those sales and get that leverage, and maybe not feel the effects of the lower traffic because you're operating better. That's what recessions and downturns do. They force you to operate better. And I think that there's real insights that we've identified here that can help people operate better, regardless of what the macroeconomic environment is.
So what would those things be? We've talked about some of them, but what would those be? And Ron, you can jump into.
Yeah, I think that generally speaking, I'll go back to we talk about the experience being the differentiator. One thing that in talking about the credit piece, this jumped way out to me when we looked at the data. consumers that paid with that did promotional financing through Synchrony, they had a higher perception of the experience with their retailer across all 15 of the categories that they were asked to rate. So when you think about opportunities to connect with people, and you think about opportunities to drive that that close rate, to drive the general appearance or the feel that you're driving an experience that's the type of experience that customers want, going back to things like easy, going to things like availability of credit, this idea of we're going to do the little things that make it better to do business with us is going to increase your close rates and capture a bigger percentage of that traffic. So there's something to, it's not a mistake that every single category, the satisfaction with their purchase experience was higher if they went with promotional financing. So that to me is one example of things that you can be leveraging to operate better.
And correct me if I'm wrong, we also found that in your study, you also found that type of experience can also drive the ticket size as well.
Yes.
Correct? Yes, is that right? I'm
Right.
I don't
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
Okay.
it definitely drives. We see that those who leverage the financing ended up spending anywhere between 20 and 40% more, depending on the category we were looking at. We study everything from a lot of these home furnishings or home categories outside of home as well. And there's a range, but the incrementality is obvious. The incrementality is huge. It also helps from the conversion perspective. We have a really interesting data point that says, okay, you used financing, but if financing wasn't available, what would you have done? And 34% for the home category said they would have just walked right out the door and not purchase. So it's helping close that deal. It's helping with that conversion. So the incrementality is there, but back to his point about the conversion point. Yeah.
Incrementality. I love it when I get something added to my vocabulary list. I love that. That's really cool. By the way, I should have mentioned this at the beginning as people are like me scrawling all kinds of notes and things like that. But everyone is going to be getting a copy of this study in a follow-up email in the morning, as well as a link to the on-demand playback. So you will get that, I promise. But it doesn't mean we can't continue really kind of talking globally here, though, about some of these takeaways. I thought it was interesting that when you pair together these results, there were some sort of headlines here. And one of them is that the consumer right now wants the entire process to be easy. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think we're just talking there about, and this is something we've been harping on for the last couple of years and everything. So this is basically saying from hitting the door to final mile. I mean, we're talking about the fact of you can't just, we've talked a lot about the importance of the sales associate. That's still is just a piece of it. Do you want either one of you want to grab that one?
If I could, I'll just jump in on that, and I'll go back to the funnel mentality. Okay, keeping that funnel mentality every single time you touch a customer, whether it's digital, online, or they walk into your store, that funnel should start right. You should be looking at your web journey and how that can help to narrow their decisions to a point. And then when they walk into the store, the associates are recognizing that they came in at that point, and they're picking up where that digital journey left off and driving them through that funnel. That to me is that having that mentality can really help better connect with the customer, better take advantage of every opportunity to interact. That to me feels like a great way to be really looking at and evaluating your entire experiences. How can we be driving them through that funnel? There's another stat that I think is important to throw out, that the average store visits, the average numbers of stores visited across these categories was just shy of 2 across the categories on average. So what that tells me is the average consumer doesn't want to go to 2 stores. They don't want to go to 2 stores. If they could go to 1, they'd be fine. If it was 2.4, I'd say they don't want to go to 3. But because it was an average shy of 2, they don't want to go to 2. So to me, that's an indicator of they want it to be easy. If you can make it easy for them, you're giving them no reason to go and shop at another store down the street. Take that, seize on it when the opportunity is there.
Well, Chris, you just said what hit me when you said that is it is your customer to lose, is what you're saying by that research. If they don't want to go to another store, so they are your customer to lose if you're not attentive. And Rhonda, the thing about this though, and I'm seeing that in that top 10, delivery comes up twice in the top 9. So as we talk about now, Chris got us getting them through the funnel, right? Getting to the point of transacting. But let's talk a little bit about the fact that you can't let up on the pedal. We do have a customer base out there, a consumer that really wants it carried all the way through, period.
All the way through, absolutely. And I would remind everyone, keep in mind, this was conducted in late 2021 when we were having a lot of the product availability issues with supply chain. And so, those items speed of delivery, product availability did rise to kind of middle, slight top of the list. And I think that's because of the timing a little bit. They were feeling some pressures on, when am I going to get this item that I paid for, or that I ordered, right? Or I had to make a deposit on. And so that might be an anomaly that we don't pick up when we refield here next month and have the data available later this summer. I'm hoping that those issues subside, but let's say they don't. I mean, you still have to think through kind of that full experience. They make the purchase. Are you communicating the delivery options? If you say you're going to call them to schedule a delivery window, are they having to call you to follow up? They never called me. When is this delivery window? So how much are you making them work versus how much are you just sending to them through text message or easy emails, and you proactively communicating with them is an easy way to improve that experience.
Here's a shift too. And this is not me talking. This is from a number of retailers I've spoken to, is that now that the supply chain has caught up, and we know that delivery times are now no longer that long, there's an interesting shift there, because when we had these long waits, we had consumers that, while maybe a little frustrated at times, were willing to wait. We know that they were, as long as they were informed, they were willing to wait. Now that we're back into this cycle, it's the pressure is back on again to get it there quickly and to do it right. So it's interesting that yes, while the waits are less and they might not be worried about, well, how long is it going to be till I get it? Their expectations for everything I'm hearing of what they want in that final mile and when and et cetera is maybe stronger than it has been since pre-pandemic. Is that anything you're seeing, or is that?
Yeah, that's interesting. It kind of makes sense when you think about it, right? Because now it has become, or it could become, a retailer differentiator. So if they are visiting two retailers, if everyone is in this problem together, we were all, hold hands, we were all in it together during COVID, right? We all kind of gave people a little bit more patience on everything during COVID.
Right.
So if we're all in this together during 2021, and I go to this retailer and this retailer, and they're both having the same issue, then I guess I have no choice, right? We just gonna have to ride this out. Now, if I go to one and they're telling me one thing and the other's telling me another, that's going to become a differentiator potentially, right? If you assume, let's say all things are somewhat equal on the product itself and you're differentiating on the experience, that could be a lever that, if you are a retailer who can go faster, that could become a differentiator. So I see how we got to the point that we're at. That's a really interesting thing, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it'll come out in your research, but I just love being in the trenches in different parts of the country and with retailers who appeal to different demographics, et cetera. And it's just interesting. And that was something, when it came up, I thought, wow, you're right. We're back to that point where the expectations have changed, and there may be a little less patient, believe it or not, with missteps in that particular area. Chris, do me a favor and just a little bit deeper dive on some of these areas. One of the other things that was pulled out of this research that everybody will enjoy when we send it to them tomorrow is about the customer expecting value. And I know that's, that we don't specifically talk price in this particular survey, et cetera, but can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's a word that I think different people define different ways.
100%. I mean, it really is. I was actually thinking the same thing as you were talking about the speed and kind of the availability of the product. Value and speed are in the eye of the beholder, right? Everybody's idea of those two things can be very different depending on your individual circumstances. But when we talk about value, I think it's important to point out that there are trends that were in process before the pandemic that we believe have continued and maybe accelerated through the pandemic, particularly around customer experience, which is this idea of when they go to assign value, they're assigning value to different things that they did in the past. Okay. Or it's changed a little bit. And you see the statistics. I know American Express always has a statistic out that says it's something like 73% of consumers are willing to pay more for a better experience. If it is easier, if the sales associate is knowledgeable, I mean, let's use that as an example. That was those were in the top 5: ease of purchase process and knowledgeable sales associate. They assign value to those things. the variety of products to choose from was down the list at 13. Doesn't mean it's not important, but in terms of where they're going to pay more money or where they're going to choose to spend their money, they're looking to ascribe value, or they are ascribing value to those other things. So I think that what we're seeing from the data and from the trend line is if you can make it so they feel good about what they bought and they don't have to go to that second store, you've actually created value for them by giving them time back and giving them that convenience. So the assumption is maybe they want to shop around and they want to price shop and things like that. But the data is telling us they actually assign value to you creating an environment where they don't have to do that.
And dare I say that you have just described the very basis or the foundation for something we've talked about recently in another webinar, and that's retention of these customers. And that's the repeat business or the referral. Everything you just talked about, those are elements of what that looks like when that customer is going to say something to somebody else. So that, you're not just doing this to build that particular sale. There's more to it than that. We've got a few more minutes here, and Rhonda, I'll start with you on this one. But just, I know we've talked about obviously some key things here with the sales associates, et cetera. But what are some of the recommendations for retailers that really stand out to you that you can share in this forum and get people fired up about?
Well, one recommendation dovetails nicely with what we were just talking about around driving that loyalty. So customer reviews, for example, getting your loyal customer that you did just convert who had a good experience. We know that younger, Gen Z and millennials are leveraging customer reviews, whether that's video reviews or written reviews, in their decision making more so than older generations. So one simple recommendation is, once you think about the funnel and conversion, don't forget about that repeat, that loyalty aspect, and how you can convert an existing customer into giving you that review, because those younger generations are going to be leveraging that more as time goes on. And so making sure you have a good review system, you're integrating that into your mobile and website experience is really important. I think Chris has some great examples too from marketplace examples. I don't know, Chris, if you want to share some examples you see around best practices in the market around how to address some of these customer experience demands, I guess I would say, from consumers. But we talked about the financing. Yeah. One thing about financing, and that's a lot, I'll kick it to Chris to give some of his examples, is simple things like if a consumer hits your website, let's not make them look in the site map at the footer to find information about how to pay for things, right? Let's give it to them in an easy way on the landing page. Let's navigate them to that, again, that funnel for how we're going to convert them and make their shopping experience fantastic. Too many times I see, yes, we have all this great information embedded in our site or our mobile experience, but you got to hunt for it to find it. And so that's just a simple recommendation is let's try not to make consumers hunt for things that we know are at the top of this list in terms of decision making.
Love it. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'll pick up a couple of things. Taking off what Rhonda said about the reviews, I think that customer experience measurement is really twofold. I think that there are reviews, and that's sort of one form of getting a sense of how your customers feel about you. But we've all gotten the surveys about how likely are you to recommend, the net promoter score questions and things like that. But really doing customer experience measurement like that to really understand where your process is good and where your process needs help. To really have that be introspective, not something that's for your website, but have it be something that your company is monitoring and really holding people accountable to it. And we're seeing that trend grow across many different industries. The second thing I'll point out in terms of recommendations, and really kind of my favorite to come out of this one, and we've had a lot of success across some of these categories, sharing this with retailers, is this idea of think about if a consumer, and this goes to your question earlier, Mark, about driving traffic, okay, and capturing traffic. Think about if a consumer goes to your website and then goes to 5 other of your competitors in your market's website, and think about what they're going to see. If they see all the same thing, it becomes very difficult to stand out. It becomes very difficult to break through the noise and get them into your store. We look at it as the data is telling us that the experience is truly something that you can use to differentiate yourself. If you can take what's on your competitor's website and adjust yours to start to paint a picture more of what it's going to feel like to do business with you. What is the process they can expect? How are they going to be treated? Who are the people they are going to see when they walk into their store? Really painting this picture of if I go in there, it's going to feel different. And if the product, quote unquote product that you are selling looks different, it feels more like an easy experience than just, hey, we've got great product like everybody else has on their website, then we really believe that's an opportunity to set yourself apart and to build that trust and that rapport with the customer before they ever step foot in your store.
Yeah, I have another recommendation too, if you don't mind.
Please. No, please.
If you think about the sales process and you think about a customer, what we've seen the biggest shift over the last 3 years is, if I just step back from a 30,000-foot view, the consumer is now in control. The consumer is in the driver's seat, right? They have the reins. If this is the old school, carriage, they have the reins, right? And so when they come in your store, they are really in control. And so from a sales process or approach perspective, we need to think about maybe, making sure we're staying kind of cutting edge and in that cultural demeanor that we're dealing with now, right? It's not the old sales tactics, the pushy sales tactics, right? They're coming in informed, they're in control. They need you to fill that gap, right? So just even how we interact with the customer in store, I think needs to evolve, knowing that they're in control, right? They already have more information than a shopper 15 years ago. So we don't need to do some of those traditional kind of old school selling techniques. I think that turns consumers off. We hear qualitatively quite often. And so it's a new dynamic in terms of how we sell, knowing that the consumer dynamic has changed. Even how they think about their own data and some of the data privacy stuff that's going on in the market right now, right? They are in control. And so I just think the market, the retailer side has made such good strides, but there's still some work, I think, to be done from kind of that side of the customer experience.
Chris, I see you nodding. Go ahead. And
very well. It's very well said. I mean, it's a high five for my partner, Rhonda. The data backs that up, and it says, well, knowledgeable sales associates, the human side of this is number 3 in terms of most important. It was down toward the bottom of the list in terms of things they were satisfied with. It was I think 11th out of 15 was the how satisfied they were with the sales associate. So it becomes a huge opportunity for you. Investing in the human side of this. I know that digital becomes the shiny object to throw your money into, but what we hear across these categories, that finding and retaining good people and good sales associates is one of their biggest challenges. Putting them in that new mentality and setting them up to succeed with your customers is going to have a big impact on your bottom line.
And the biggest quote from the recommendations from this study that all of you will get a link to tomorrow morning is, consumers expect, and I want to underline that, expect to find a wide variety of product options and selection. It's no longer a point of differentiation. So you just can't tsunami them with, hey, we've got all this stuff in stock. There's much more to do with that. Now, I want to mention to you that we have a number of customer experience resources on our website, which, I repeat after me, myhfa.org. If you go there to myhfa.org/CX, you're going to find all kinds of resources there for the customer experience. And, this is incredibly valuable data, because I think, a lot of it certainly always in these studies is somewhat intuitive, and a ton today was not. So I just want to thank our 2 guests here today for really helping to bring this to life. Chris Wallace, co-founder and president of Interview Group. Chris, thank you so much. Appreciate that. And Rhonda Slavin, as always, we enjoy having you from Synchrony, the market insights leader there. And the one thing I did learn also just personally from this is that I need to replace the batteries on the clock behind me. It's the first time I've seen this. Nobody's told me this on any Zooms in the last few weeks. And so it's so far up. I looked at that and I was like, I'm in a time warp. At any rate, so I will take care of that little bit of housekeeping. But listen, as always, we thank all of you for joining us. And I always wish you 2 things. Number 1, good health. And number 2, great sales. I think we've given you some insights today to help you get there. On behalf of the entire team here at the Home Furnishings Association, I'm Mark Schumacher. Thanks. We'll see you next time.